Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. So my name is Mitchell O'Neill. I'm with the New York Natural Heritage Program. And we also have Jennifer Dean with us today, who's the invasive species biologist for the program. This training is geared towards Long Island Metro Aquatic Invasive Species partners. And many of you probably gave input for this training. So we sent out a survey to the LIMAIS group to see what sorts of topics you guys are most interested in. Because many of you are familiar with the like the basic mobile app and other common functionalities of iMapInvasives, but there's interest in some of the more advanced options. So that's what we'll be talking about today. And this is how we've kind of broken it up. So I'll give a brief introduction. One of the things this group voted on was advanced data collection. So I'll do a brief run through of the data collection tools and talk a little bit more about two tools in particular that I think might be of interest to this group. And then I'll also talk about the iMap web map services, which people were interested in. And then I'm going to hand it over to Jen, and she's going to talk about the prioritization tools. And she's also going to talk about how you can leverage some of the early detection and horizon scanning functionalities in iMap. And then we'll have time for wrap up and questions. And you can also ask questions all throughout the webinar. Jen and I will see them in the chat box, and we can also pause now and then to answer any questions that have come up. And so Jen and I work for the New York Natural Heritage Program. A lot of what this program does has to do with biodiversity conservation and studying rare species and gathering biodiversity information to inform decisions. But we also have a section dedicated to invasive species. So it's the Invasive Species Database Program. And the main thing we do is administer iMapInvasives, but we also work on some other projects like spatial prioritization models, which Jen will talk about later. And we also manage the data collection for the watercraft inspection steward program for the state. But the biggest part of what we do is probably iMapInvasives. And many of you are probably already familiar. It's the centralized invasive species database to support PRISMs, state agencies, and other partners working on invasive species issues. You can report invasive species, you can view distributions, generate reports, sign up for early detection alerts, which Jen will talk about later. The data are available in web map services so that you can use them in web maps and ArcGIS platforms, and I'll talk about that briefly later. And you can also track control efforts and results. And so initially this data, the database for this big data, the data for this big database came from pre-existing data sets collected by partners across the state. And that was really good for getting a baseline of where invasive species were found in the state, or at least known in the state. But since then, for the past couple of years, it's really switched to the most important data source is community scientists and professionals entering data in real time, which helps keep our database up to date. And one important thing to note is that so anybody can report to iMapInvasives, and because of that, we have a data quality check in place where species identification is confirmed by experts who are known as confirmers in iMapInvasives. And so many partners have partnered with us in the past, and we thank everyone who has submitted data to the database and who uses our tools. Two parts of iMapInvasives that many of you probably already, some of you probably already use them, many of you have at least tried them before, is the web interface, where you can view all of the data and you can also enter data. It kind of gives you the full range of functionality. And the one caveat is that it does require connectivity because, of course, it's a website. So you need internet connection. And then, so to kind of help people who need to report out in the field when they don't have internet connection, we have the iMap mobile app, which is kind of a very simplified version, which just lets you do point records, presence not detected, but the benefit is that you can do it out in the field without internet connection. Some tools that are not used by all users, we have these advanced field data collection tools, which are kind of, there's a couple different ones, which I'll go over. And they each have different pros and cons and different use cases. But essentially the main idea is that these tools, they incorporate more of the functionality from the web interface. So you can do things like points, lines, and polygons. You can do treatments, that sort of stuff. And you can do that all when you're not in connectivity. So you can do it out in the field. And the way that these all kind of work is that the data is uploaded to ArcGIS Online, and then it goes into iMapInvasives. And then once it's in iMapInvasives, it's just like any other iMap record. So email alerts are sent out, the data is viewable in the web map services, etc. And so to start, I was just going to do a 1 or 2 minute walkthrough of what the interface looks like. So I'll go online. So you can go to our website at nyiMapInvasives.org. There's a lot of resources, but to get to the actual database, you just click the login button. That brings you to the login page, and you can either create an account if you don't have one, or you can enter your credentials up top. If you have an old account, you can try the forgot password if you can't get in, and you can always email us if you can't figure out how to get in. So then when you log in, you'll be brought to a screen like this. So by default shows you where all the records are across North America, with the bigger orange circles meaning more data. So I'm going to zoom into the Long Island region. So I do the trick where you shift and then click out a rectangle and it zooms you in. And just to give you a brief orientation of where everything is, so there's navigation tools on the left-hand side, zooming in and out, or searching in a town, West Babylon, or what have you. There's the main menu where you can look at email alerts and jurisdiction species lists and stuff like that. There's action tools along the top, like the create record tool, and all sorts of other tools that I won't go into too much detail right now. And then on the right-hand side, you have your geographic layers. Like you can change base maps, you can create distribution maps, etc. So for instance, right now, I'll just show how you would filter on one species. So it shows all species by default. Typically, our users will want to be looking at a certain species of interest. So if you open up this filter tool, there's a lot of new options to filter on for different record types. I'm just going to focus on the general stuff, so the simple stuff that's most commonly used. So for species name, I'll look at the water primrose willow, floating primrose willow, Ludwigia. And so I'll click on that. You could also put in dates or your organization. If you want to look at your organization data, you could look at your own data. But I'll just look at all of the Ludwigia data. And so now I can see these orange hexagons here. I'll make them a little less transparent so you can see them better, and I'll change to a blank or a light gray base map. And so you see the summarized hexagons at first, but if you zoom in, you can see the points themselves. And one thing to always remember is that what you're seeing on the map is controlled by both the filter tool, but also the layers on off. So right now I am only seeing the confirmed presences. So if I want to see unconfirmed, I would turn on that, and you'll see there's some more observations that haven't been viewed yet. You could turn on approximate data, not detected records, so you can see there's some nearby places where people have searched but not found it. And you can look at treatments, and in this case, there aren't any recorded that I can see at least. So that's just a basic rundown of what the interface looks like. Jen's going to go into more detail about some of the options for early detection and horizon scanning, but I'll leave it here for now. So that was my introduction, and so now I'm going to talk about data collection. I just showed you the database. There's a ton of data there. What's the value of actually putting your data there? There's a couple different reasons. So infestations tend to spread over time. And to keep track of that, we need to document that in a centralized database. And also there are lots of management efforts by many different organizations all across the state. And so do these efforts slow the spread or reduce infestations? Are they not effective in some situations? And you can think about this both at a local site level and at a regional level. So in the image on the slide, you can imagine an invasive species pops up in a location. So you could document that with a presence record. The next year, it might grow, and you might document that now as a polygon, and then maybe there are other points where it's spread to. And as the years go by, it'll keep growing. So that's kind of the change of infestations over time. If you think about it from the management angle, let's say the managers become aware of the population at this moment in time when the infestation has spread to this extent. So they can actually record a treatment record. And since we know invasive species often don't just disappear after you treat them once, most managers will go back a second year and see what comes back up. Usually some will come back up, hopefully a smaller infestation. And then you could treat it again that year. And then maybe eventually you are no longer finding it and you can put a not detected record on top. And after several years, an infestation can be considered presumed eliminated. So that's kind of what we envision for how iMapInvasives can be used for tracking the spread of invasive species and its management at a site level. So by looking at the distribution class that's selected for individual records through time, so an infestation could go from sparse to dense to monoculture through the years, for example, or the number of points or the size of polygons could increase. And then if you look at treatments, you can look at pre-treatment surveys, the treatment record, and then post-treatment surveys and see if size and density and other fields are changing as well. And Jen will touch on this later, but if you have any post-treatment follow-up data, we do have a grad student who's working on collecting and sharing this data across New York State. So stay tuned for when Jen mentions that a little bit later. And so that project that the grad student's working on is like a statewide all species goal. One thing we started last year as sort of a first attempt was to focus on just one species and try to get people across the state to record their survey and treatment records efforts in a standardized way so that we can compare efforts across the region and also summarize them together. And so we're focusing on water chestnut action sites. So if anyone here does water chestnut polls or knows someone who does them, please feel free to reach out to me after this call to figure out how to get your data into this system. But essentially, people across the state are reporting their water chestnut efforts into iMapInvasives. which allows us to start to make these assessments. So you can see we estimated that over 50,000 kilograms were surveyed, and then of those, about 30,000 were actually pulled or treated in some way. And to show you what that looks like at more of a site level, and I should also mention the value will kind of come as this is repeated year after year, and you can kind of look at trends and see what's working and what's not. But to look at it at a more site level example, so here's Delegan Pond in Wilton, New York. In 2020, it was mapped by Capital Region Prism, and you can see there's this monoculture patch, then a larger sparse patch, and then a couple more instances at the north end of the lake. And so you don't have to pay attention to those numbers, but what's happening here is there was a biomass study where we got an average biomass for a square meter of each of these different distribution classes. And so since we have that from a field study last year, we can estimate the biomass in any patch as long as we have the area of that patch and the distribution class. So essentially the monoculture patch is going to be multiplied by a high number of a weight density, so 306.8 grams per meter squared. And the sparse is going to be multiplied by a lower value, so 3.3 grams per meter squared. And what that lets you do is come up with a biomass estimate that is standard and can be applied to infestations across the state without requiring partners to have to dry out the biomass and weigh it or come up with some other standardized way to quantify their biomass. And then in 2021, the site was surveyed again, and you can see the infestation actually spread a little bit. It's popping up in more locations, but when it came back in 2021, there was no longer a monoculture patch. So when they treated it in 2020, and it comes back in 2021, they actually did end up decreasing it. So it was a larger area, but since such a sparse infestation instead of a monoculture, the estimated biomass that came up in 2021 was actually much less. And so they did another treatment, and hopefully in 2022, it'll be even less. So I'm hoping that I have at least somewhat conveyed the why for reporting to iMapInvasives. So tracking and coordinating local and regional efforts, also looking at the big picture, getting a statewide view, and documenting need and efforts, tracking change over time, maintaining institutional knowledge, and highlighting successes. So hopefully I've given you some reasons why to report to iMapInvasives. And so now I'll talk about the how. You don't need to look at the details of this table right now. You can always go to our report and invasive page to look at this table of all of our different reporting options. Essentially, there's the online and the mobile app, which many of you are already familiar with. So I'll be very brief with those. But then there's these two tools, the iMap Survey123 and the Simple Aquatic Survey Pro, which I'm going to focus most of my time on today because those I think have a lot of potential for this group. And we do also have a couple of other tools, but I'm not going to focus on those today. One of them is more for terrestrial species, the forest pest data collection tool. And then iMap Mobile Advanced is a very powerful tool as well, but we generally try to see if people can try out the Survey123 first because it has a lot of the same functionality and it's a little bit easier. So we just generally try to start people on the Survey123 first, and if they need more, then they can go to the iMap Mobile Advanced. So many of you are familiar with the online interface. It's good for reporting records back at home or back in the office. For instance, you could take notes in the field and then go back home and use satellite imagery to trace out an infestation based on your notes. You can input historical data. One benefit is that you have access to all the data fields. and it is also mobile responsive. So if you do have internet connectivity in the field, you can actually just log in online and record your data right there. And many of you also know the mobile app. It's kind of the go-to reporting tool for simple data, for present and not detected. Because it's built for quick and easy data collection, it's the most popular tool for volunteers, but it is also used by professionals, particularly for incidental findings or when they just need a quick way to report simple presence and not detected data. And it does not give you all of the fields in iMap, so it just limits it to a couple key fields like time searched, distribution, size of infestation. In the map, you can see aquatic invasive species points in sort of the Peconic River area, mostly collected by LISM staff. So those are the two tools that most people are already familiar with. So now I'll talk about these two tools. And so the Survey123 and SAS-Pro. And I should mention at the beginning that these are actually both forms within Survey123. So Survey123 is an app created by Esri, and we have set up forms within the Survey123 for data collection where the data gets into iMap. So since they're both using Survey123, they kind of have the same three-step workflow. So you have to set it up while you have internet connection. So you download the Survey123 application, you download the form that you're interested in using, you make sure you have your iMap person ID so that you can link your Survey123 records to your iMapInvasives account. And if you want to use an offline base map, you can configure that too. So you have to do all that while you're in connectivity, but then you're ready to go out in the field and you don't need connectivity to record observations. But you do need to upload those once you're back in connectivity. So it's a three-step workflow, very similar to the iMap mobile app. And one tip for whenever you use Survey123 Forms is that there's a really handy favorites feature. It lets you save some responses to some questions where the answer doesn't change. For example, your iMap person ID, your organization ID, any other fields, you can save those as favorites, and it saves you from having to type those in every time. You can just paste them in on every new survey. So I'll start by talking about the general iMapInvasive Survey123 form. So it's kind of built to have more functionality from the online that the mobile app is missing. So you can record treatments, you can record multi-record searched areas, so one record with multiple species found. You can do lines and polygons, and more functionality like that. And how that works in the form is sort of a form full of like nested boxes that have different sets of questions. So for example, there's a searched area box, and there are different attributes that you can fill out for it. And then within that, there are boxes with sets of questions for different records, for different record types. So for present species, for not detected species, for treatment records, etc. And of course, there's a geographic component. So you draw a polygon for your searched area just to generally represent the area where you're searching. And then you can record the locations within that searched area where you're finding invasive species. So for example, I would say this patch has invasive species. And then for each of those presence polygons, you can then tag whatever species are there. So sometimes it's one species, sometimes it's multiple. And you can have additional presence records, which would also have species attached to those, and so on. So you can have as many presence records within your searched area as you deem appropriate, and as many species in each of those presence records as you find. So then there's also the not detected series of questions. And so those would be any species that you did not find in the entire searched area polygon. And then you can also do, so you list those species, and you can also record treatment records in the Survey123. And so that's really the main advantages of the Survey123. It's that you can do the polygons and you can do treatments. So one example from the 2021 field season in the Finger Lakes, that was what PRISM staff and some strike team staff and other partners largely used to report their water chestnut pulls, because it allowed them to record polygons and treatment records all while in the field and without needing internet connection. So I think there's a lot of potential for this tool, particularly for people who are recording treatments. And I'll show you where to go at the end, where to learn more about how to use these tools. But the other tool I'm going to talk about is Simple Aquatic Survey Pro. So this is very similar to the general Survey123 form, but it's a different Survey123 form. So it's geared a little bit more towards aquatic surveys specifically, especially rake tosses. But it has that it has the same data schema where you have a searched area record with related presence, not detected treatment records in sort of a nested box structure in the form. So you have your searched area, which might be the boundary of a pond or something. And then there are fields you can fill out for the searched area. Just like the Survey123 form, there's a lot of fields you can fill out, but you don't necessarily have to fill out all of them. So it's whichever fields you find useful. They're there to fill out if you want to, but they're not required. So you can skip over fields. One unique thing that the SAS-Pro form has is this option to select target species. And I'll explain why that's important later, but this would be where you list out the species that you are actively looking for. And then you select a survey method for your searched area. So there's, you pick between top, under, and shoreline, and then you pick the specific method you're using, like rake tosses, LinkedIn nets, traps, and some other options. Rake toss is definitely the most commonly used and what the survey was first designed around. So once you have your survey method selected, you can then start adding presence locations wherever you, in this case, wherever you conducted a rake toss. And so there are some general fields you can answer about the rake toss. But the most important part is to tag the species that you found when you did that rake toss. And so you create a species and list the abundance and other information, and then you add more species if you detected multiple species on that rake toss. And you can do multiple rake tosses within that searched area polygon, and it works the same way where you tag the species that you found. And one really useful part of this tool is how the target species list interacts with your present species that you found. So for any species on your target list, so species that you said you are looking for this species, but that are not on the list of species you found on your presence records, it will automatically create a not detected record for that species. So say you have Ludwigia, Hydrilla, and water chestnut on your target species list, and then in one rake toss you found Ludwigia, and another rake toss you found water chestnut, and that's all you found. When it goes into iMap, it will recognize that and it will create a not detected record for Hydrilla because you were looking for it, but you didn't find it. So that can be really helpful in saving you time from having to create not detected records for species that you surveyed for. And here's one example of how that's been used in Long Island. It's a rake toss survey done by LIMAIS staff. In this example, on a river in Suffolk County, and you can see this big polygon, which is their searched area. And you can see these green points where they found species, and so there were 15 presences. I don't have all of them listed here because there's too many. It would take up a lot of the slide. And then it also has the not detected species listed. So these are the species that LISMA had on their target species list that they were looking for, but they did not find anywhere. And so this, I should have mentioned, this table is taken directly from the iMap record. So there's a lot of potential here, particularly by use by professionals, but it is also a good fit for trained volunteers conducting rake toss surveys. I know they've had success with volunteers using SAS-Pro in the Adirondacks, for example. So yeah, I just think there's a lot of potential for those two tools. I know I didn't give a complete training on either of them right now, so I will let you know where you can find more information. So on our training page, so if you click training on the web page I was showing you earlier, we have a self-guided training section. And so there's some most commonly requested training materials on here. For instance, how to report water chestnut pools in iMap. But we also have a full library that you can view. So if you click See All iMap Resources, or if you click on our Help Resources library, you'll be brought to our full table of all our help resources. And you can use these checkbox options at the top in the search bar to kind of search for whatever you want. And for the tools I was just talking about, if you click NY Advanced Tools, that will pull up all of those data collection tools that I just talked about. So you can view a PDF of the table of all of the different tools and what the pros and cons are. There's also some written descriptions of the tools on that document. And then there's also specific resources for individual tools. So if you're interested in SAS-Pro, you could put SAS-Pro in the search box, and we have a PDF document that kind of goes through all the steps, but we also have a webinar recording that kind of goes through each step in depth. And we have the same thing for the general Survey123 form as well, a PDF and a webinar recording. And if that got muddled at all, I just want to re-emphasize. So Survey123 is an app developed by Esri, and we have multiple forms that can report iMap within that app. So there's what we call the iMap Survey123, because it's just kind of the general Survey123 form for iMapInvasives. And then we also have more specialized forms, one of them being SAS-Pro. So they're both in Survey123, but have different names. And so if you get your data into iMapInvasives with any of those tools, then they will be available in iMapInvasives. You can see them when you log in online, but they'll also be available in the iMap web map services. And so I'll talk about those briefly, just to get everyone acclimated to the idea of the web map services, and I'll also point you to where you can learn more and kind of get into the nitty-gritty details. So why are the web map services useful? So these come into play in a variety of scenarios. One example would be, say you want to display a distribution map for an individual species on a website. So that's a map of Asian clam, I believe, coming from the iMap data. Or maybe you want to view invasive species data of interest within your ArcGIS desktop project. And so one thing you can do is export the data from iMapInvasives. That's often helpful. But say you're trying to show the distribution of Asian clam on your website. Once you create that map, another record might come in the next week, and that means you have to re-download the data and republish your map and continually update it. And at any given moment, you might not have the most up-to-date data. And same for ArcGIS desktop work. Every time you go back into your project, there might be new data that you don't have in your map because you're working off an export from a few weeks ago. And it's a lot of work to keep those up to date. So we always encourage people to consider the iMap WMS or Web Map service. It's an Esri ArcGIS server on the back end, and it's the service that actually powers the main map on the online interface of iMapInvasives. So if you use it in ArcGIS desktop or ArcGIS online platforms, you are actually looking at the most up-to-date iMap data, so the live iMapInvasives data. You can create your own maps in ArcGIS Online or other GIS software. So there's a lot of potential here. And for anyone not familiar with the Web Map service, so it's an internet service which delivers map image tiles or geographic data to mapping applications. And an application will make a request for data contained within a specific bounding box, so like the box of a map. And one thing I'll mention here is that there's two types of web map services, at least in the Esri world. So there's map services, which serve map image tiles, and there are feature services that serve geographic data. And I'll explain why that's important to keep in mind later. So like I said before, you can use the web map services in a lot of different ArcGIS platforms. What you can do kind of varies from platform to platform. So ArcGIS Pro and ArcGIS Online, you can do pretty much everything you would want to do in one of those platforms with the web map services, with some limitations. For ArcMap, it kind of depends. So if you're 10.6 or higher, there is a lot that you can do with the web map services. Not quite as much as ArcGIS Pro, but still most of the functionalities that you would want to use. For ArcMap, lower than 10.6, unfortunately, is pretty limited, but you can do basic things like access the presence records and identify and view those records. And I should mention, I'm also going to show you where we have a detailed help document that kind of lists out these sorts of details, so you don't need to remember everything I'm presenting now. One other thing to consider is what fields are available in the web map services. So if you're using the web map services and you click on a presence record, it doesn't necessarily have all of the fields that we track in iMap. It kind of has a subset of the most important fields. So for example, for presences, it has the presence record ID, the observer name, information on the species, the prism that it falls into, and some other information. So a lot of info, but not all info. So we feel that the WMS is very powerful. There are a lot of cases where you want to use the WMS, but in some cases you do still want to use exports. So the WMS is great for when you need to overlay iMap layers with your own data. So you can have your own data open and you can pull iMap data in using the web map services. It's good to use if you want to always have the most current data and you don't want to repeatedly update and export that data. And it's also great if you only need a limited number of fields. So if all the fields you need are on this list, then the web map service is probably going to suit your needs pretty well. Some cases where you would want to go back to using exports would be if you need very detailed fields that are not available in the web map services. If you're working with a huge amount of data in an advanced analysis, you might want to consider an export. So the web map service, of course, since it's web-based, it has to load from online. So if you're doing like all records in iMapInvasives, or hundreds of thousands of records, you might find that it works better if you just use an export. And if you want a copy of the data to store permanently, you would want to use an export because the WMS doesn't store data. It just kind of does a live call to data whenever you open up your map. And also, if you're using pre 10.6 ArcMap and you want to use anything beyond the presence records, you might want to consider exports just because of those limitations that I briefly mentioned earlier. And so if you do decide that the WMS is helpful for your project, this is the general workflow. So you open your map, it might be a web map or a story map or an ArcGIS Pro project. So you open up your map that you want to add iMap data to, and then you add a layer by URL. And so this URL, it's a service link that you're going to get from the iMap WMS directory, which I'll show you in a second. One example would be the feature service URL for all presence data. And so you add that in, and by default, it'll be all species data. So you'll want to use some filters or definition queries to filter down to the data you need, rather than all of the data in that layer. For example, filtering on a species ID. And then finally, you'll just want to adjust symbology and whatever else, pop-ups and whatever else you want to customize. And so I'll talk a little bit more about step 2, the getting that URL for the service that you want to add into the map. So I'll show you where to find this link at the end, but this link brings you to the services directory, and it has a list of all the services in iMap. And for example, one thing listed is the public presences. And so when you click on there, you'll find that there are multiple options. So you have this top level link for all presence records, and then you have these next level links for the different geographies or geometries. So points, lines, species, which is actually polygons, and then centroids, which are just centroids of the polygons. So that's kind of confusing at first glance. But it's actually kind of important to think about which link you want to use. So the top level link, which has all the different geometries, is a map service, which I mentioned earlier. So that serves map image tiles, which load faster, but have some, they don't necessarily have full functionality. And then there's the feature services, which serve geographic data. And so those take longer to load, but they have more functionality. And so which one should you use? It kind of depends. And I'm not going to go through every situation, but essentially it depends on what you're trying to do, what software you're using. It often comes down to the map service will load fast if you're just doing something simple, but if you need more functionality, you might go for the feature service, which might load slower. And in some cases, it will load fast enough, and it's not a problem at all. But I'll show you, we have a document that kind of goes through all of these scenarios, so I won't spend time going through all the different scenarios. It's just important to know that there's these two different types of web map services, and that there are some things to think through before you pick which one you want to use. A couple really quick tips before I show you where to find more information on these. So sometimes the WMS might take a bit to load. That might be when you consider switching to a map service if you're using a feature service. And also make sure that you're filtering the data so that it's not trying to load all the data, it's like a smaller subset. And I also want to mention there's this authentication step for any of the layers that you can't view when you're not signed in. So stuff like not detected in treatment, where you need to sign into iMap to view that data. You will be prompted for iMap credentials when you try to use those web map services. And so that was just a really brief overview. So to learn more, you can go to that same resources table on our training page. And if you search WMS, you'll find our WMS Help Doc, which tells you how to navigate the directory, capabilities in each platform, when to use the map and feature services, how to filter, tips, etc. And there's a lot of details here. So always please feel free to reach out to us, and we'd be happy to help you discuss your options or figure out any problems you're running into. And so now, please feel free to enter any questions in the chat, and I will hand it over to Jennifer Dean.
All right, great, thanks. And actually, Stephen Pearson was not able to get in on the first couple minutes, so I told him he could go ahead and do a quick intro to the group. So Steve, take it away.
All right, thanks, Jen. So Mitch, great presentation. I look forward to seeing Jen's. So thank you everyone for joining the training today. This has been, I don't know if Mitch mentioned it at the start, but this has been a work product of a working group from the Long Island, New York City metro area Aquatic Invasive Species Task Force. So the task force has worked, all winter to kind of come up with these ideas and survey everyone within the task force to come up with the concepts that we're going over today. So thank you everyone for participating, and we look forward to everything else LIMAIS does moving forward. So thanks Mitch, and thanks Dean or Jen, sorry, for putting this on.
All right, yeah, thanks Steve for organizing this. This is great. All right, well, thanks Mitch for a good overview on some of the iMap tools, and I'm going to talk about some of the prioritization tools and essentially like what we've been doing with the data that comes in, because there is so much going on in New York State and a lot of data that comes in, probably over the last 10, 15 years. How do you weed through that? Pardon my pun with invasive species, but how do you weed through the data to, really get at what it is that you should be paying attention to, and, what are some of the important findings? And so first I'll talk about the prioritization tools, and then I'll finish up with some early detection functions on iMap itself. All right, so just in general, when we're thinking about prioritization for invasive species, we're thinking about all these different lenses as natural resource managers, thinking about pathways, of course. How can we reduce those pathways invasion? What species should we be targeting? Where will we have our biggest impacts if we do control or survey work? And within that, connecting any of those different lenses are projects that we work on. So, usually these are site-specific and or species-specific projects that we're delving into. Oh, sorry. Put your mouse there. All right, and so for a different work group a couple months ago, I tried to compile some of the different products that are available throughout the state, or different ways that we tap into things. With pathways, of course, it really comes down to policy and regulations, like the Part 575 and Part 576 are big ones for reducing pathways of invasive species, and education outreach is crucial. When we're thinking about species, I'm going to talk a little bit about the invasive species tiers that are used across the state, but we also are fortunate to have about 600 different non-native species assessed for their invasiveness using a standardized protocol. And there's also a lot of expert knowledge. So we have our PRISMs and our natural resource, our agency staff that are, very knowledgeable about invasive species. When we're thinking about locations, different groups use different acronyms as kind of an alphabet soup. We got like high priority areas, or maybe high probability areas, kind of thinking about what how you're defining that. ISPZs are those invasive species prevention zones that were used by some of the PRISMs. PCAs, priority conservation areas, also used by some PRISMs. And so there's just different ways that groups or agencies have used to prioritize their locations. We do have the New York National Heritage Program has some spatial prioritization models, both for terrestrial and now for aquatic resources. There's also the Environmental Resource Mapper through the DEC website, which is a really good tool. Yeah, it has rare species, wetlands, and lots of other information all aggregated together. Of course, you can use more high-tech GIS tools and maybe even get into habitat suitability models. And of course, the iMap data itself is a good way to prioritize locations. And then when you're thinking about projects, you know, will management of a particular species at a particular location be effective? Of course, there's expert knowledge. I put that one first. I mean, you know, the regional managers really know their areas well. Cornell's Invasive Species Research Institute has been working on a regional planning model. And there's also this invasive plant management decision analysis tool that's more of a site scale tool. And I'll touch on those very briefly at the end. And so on our website, the NYIMapInvasives.org, there is a page. If you go to the tabs, you can get to under data and tools, the species tiers and prioritization area. And so it does break down some of the tools that we've developed here at the Heritage Program and the iMap team. And starting with the invasive species tiers. And so this is a framework, essentially a framework of definitions so that each region or each PRISM can use the same common like management language when they're talking about which species they're focusing on. And so tier 1 species are ones that are not yet in that region of interest or that PRISM, but are high impact. So we're looking at impacts here that are based on the invasiveness assessments and an expert opinion. And then, sorry, I should have defined these axes here. And then we're also looking at the abundance or difficulty of eradication of species. So just focusing on those higher, very high impact species, tier 1, as I mentioned, they're not yet in that area. Tier 2, there's very few populations and perhaps eradication is feasible. Tier 3 might be past the point of eradication, but you may be able to contain or slow the spread of that species. And tier 4 are those high impact non-native species that are widespread. I think Phragmites is probably an example of that for every region of the state. But you might still choose to control it for the benefit of certain valued assets at that site. Like you might have rare species in a coastal wetland or you know, certain areas where you really need to manage that tier 4 species. And we do have another category called tier 5 for species that we just don't know yet. They're non-native. They might be kind of jumping the fence, so to speak, or escaping out of intentional plantings. And we're keeping a close eye on it to see if it exhibits invasive behaviors, or perhaps as you know, our climate is changing, it might become more invasive. And so these tiers follow the concepts of the invasion curve. And so you've probably seen that, and these phases are defined by those tiers. And we do have a table online where you can search and filter the tiers that have been developed by the PRISMs. So what we do is each year we produce, here in-house, we produce what we call the data tiers. So how would these species fall out into these lists per region if it was just based on the data? And then the experts take a look at that and let us know where there's disagreement between the data and the expert tier. And then we take that finalized expert tier for our online table. All right, and then just jumping over to locations, like thinking about how we're prioritizing where our invasive species efforts will most pay off. And of course, there's lots of different ways to categorize that. As I mentioned earlier, you might be looking at areas with high conservation value that are not very infested, or you might be looking at high risk areas that do have a lot of infestations and maybe the spot where a brand new invasive is most likely to show up. So lots of things to consider. We did create terrestrial invasive species prioritization models here at the Heritage Program about 5 years ago. And this was a way to help managers prioritize where to focus their resources for early detection by coupling conservation value and risk of spread. And so to do this, we compiled spatial data sets that were available on a statewide basis, and for factors that influence invasive species control decisions. And from these, we created new model layers or synthesis layers that tapped into conservation value, protection status, and risk of spread. And so each of these component layers were made up of many different types of spatial data. So like with our ecological significance, that was made up of rare species information, stream quality metrics from the biological assessment profiles across the state, like the macroinvertebrate surveys, and also predicted native mussel richness as indicators of health. The protected or natural component of this model tapped into the New York Protected Areas database and the National Land Cover database as well. So using that natural cover type. And risk of spread, we tapped into another product from the Heritage Program that was created for a different project called the Landscape of Condition Assessment. And this is essentially a map of the human imprints or human footprints across the state. So transportation networks, urban development, industrial development, and so forth. And then we also included where natural areas interface, recreation uses are interfacing natural areas like boat launches and campgrounds and trailheads. So with the input from our advisory group, we compiled these different components and then created a comprehensive score map where these red hotspots and indicate areas that have both high conservation value and high risk of new invasions and dispersal. And this is actually available online through our through an ArcGIS map using the web map service for the iMap data, like Mitch was talking about. And so you can actually drill in quite close. These are on 30-meter raster squares, the resolution is. And so you can get down to like a park level and see some of the defining areas that have maybe higher risk of spread than others or higher ecological value than others. And so that was focusing on terrestrial. One thing that's brand new, and it's actually still being updated a little bit, but I'd say in the next month or two, this will be ready for prime time, is a aquatic invasive species pond and lake vulnerability prioritization tool. And this was also created by the New York National Heritage Program. We have two spatial ecologists or analysts on our program, Tim Howard, our Director of Science, and Amy Conley, who do amazing work with spatial data and analyzing spatial data. And so Mitch and I actually worked together to convene a work group to help advise this effort. And we decided on a framework that filters through our 8,600 and some lakes and ponds across New York State based on risk of introduction, risk of establishment, risk of impact to those lakes that might be infested, and then to give us an overall vulnerability or list of lakes that are vulnerable that managers can use to help help refine their priorities. We don't see this as like any one answer, just like any of these prioritization tools. This is another tool in your toolbox to help you decide where to go and look. And so by filtering through these different factors, the introduction, the establishment, and the negative impacts, then that will lead you to a subset of lakes by adjusting. So the user yourself, you adjust the thresholds of how much risk you're willing to take. And you actually have histograms showing the distribution of lakes that fall within those risk scores. And you filter down to the number of lakes potentially impacted, and then you can actually export those lake results so that you have all the different metrics that went into the model for that subset of lakes that you've filtered down to, so that you can, that hopefully that data can then help you further with your prioritization decisions. And so this is available on our website. Like I said, there still are a couple more improvements that are being made to it. We had our last advisory group meeting about 2 weeks ago, and they had some great feedback that's being incorporated currently. And then we are planning to offer the first training on this over the summer. And we, of course, are inviting the advisory group and this group as well, the LIMAIS group, to be able to kind of sneak preview this tool before we launch it on prime time, essentially to all the PRISM partners, just so that you can start looking at it and getting a feel for it and seeing, hopefully it'll be useful for you, like letting us know like what kind of use cases you could see this being helpful for. All right, and so it's talking about species and locations, and then coming down to like more of the site-specific tools that we have. So, that project by species, or sorry, species by location or so forth. There's a few different things in the works here. So many of you may have heard of the invasive plant management decision analysis tool. This is the IPM-DAT. It's been kicking around for quite a few years now. It was developed by the Nature Conservancy, and then we took it and made it into an online clickable interface, so that it's basically a form that you fill out, and it takes you step by step on through the questions you should be asking yourself if you're about ready to embark on a management project, to make sure that you're getting a good return on investment and that it's feasible. So it's a great tool. It is available at ipmdat.org, and there's a lot of information on that website about it. And then the Cornell and the New York Invasive Species Research Institute have been working on a regional management model that should be coming out this summer. This is an optimization modeling project. It looks at per species per 5-kilometer block. So it's looking at a regional level, which management strategies are, should someone be implementing. And so based out of these 3 different options. So this was a very intensive effort through the Cornell Computer Sciences and the Research Institute and the PRISM and agency experts. A couple years ago, we had some expert elicitation workshops that contributed to the model inputs on this. So I'm anxiously awaiting the final launch of that. And then the third box over here, Mitch mentioned this briefly. We do have a post-treatment monitoring data analysis project currently in progress. This is a graduate student, Fate Simon Nguyen. He is out of SUNY ESF, and he's working closely with us to figure out the best ways to leverage the iMapInvasives data collection interface and data visualization to be able to more efficiently collect and analyze management data, or management follow-up data, I should say. So, iMap is great for presences. We have, lots of information on the locations of species. It's been, okay in the amount of treatments over the years. It's been increasing as now these mobile apps are more widely available, and it's easier to input that data in the field. But I feel like where the data has been lacking is on that post-treatment follow-up. And a lot of times that's tied to like our grants and so forth. It might fund a treatment, say, but it doesn't fund that follow-up. And so it's much harder to get that information. And so Fate is beating the bushes in a sense, trying to get as much post-treatment management data as he can find to start making some simple analyses to try to like look at a statewide view of our management statuses and see how we're doing. And so if you do have some post-treatment monitoring data, if you've probably heard me give this call before, but if you haven't and you do have some data, then please let us know. You can either reach us at the iMapInvasives email address, or Fate is FSYEWOAN@syr.edu. All right. So I'm going to hop online here in a sec, but I'll just pause there and see if there's any questions about those that very quick run through of prioritization tools I just gave you. And Fade, if you see, I mean, Mitch, if you see anything in the chat, you can shout that out. It's harder to
Yes.
see it. I'm sharing my screen.
Yeah, I'll let you know if I see anything.
Cool. I'll go ahead and switch over. Let's see here. All right. So there are just a few quick things I wanted to demonstrate on the iMap site. And so this is our landing page that Mitch had mentioned, the NYIMapInvasives.org. On the data and maps, under that tab, there's a species tiers and prioritization button, which zooms you down to links to each of those things I just talked about, or at least some of them. I guess not everything is on here yet. But the spatial prioritization models, the species tiers, and the IPM data. But I'm going to go to the species tiers table and show you the sortable, filterable table that we have. So this is the result of all the expert tiering for each of the 8 prisms and the statewide results from last year. And we're currently working on the updates for the newest run of analyses. All right, so you can pick your tier. So I mean, I'm sorry, your prism or your statewide if you'd like that. So if I select, say, LISMA, say I want to just focus on tier 2, 3, and 4 species, so the things that are currently high impact and in my prism. And let's say I just want to focus on aquatics, so I'm going to only leave the aquatic animal and plants there. Then this gives you a quick overview of you know, which species are tiered. Remembering this is last year's, we're still working on getting our next ones up. And you can also search by species as well. And you can add additional prisms on there if you wanted to do a side-by-side comparison, like Lower Hudson and the and LISMA together, and you can see how those species were tiered. Another nice thing is if this is a species that's currently present in New York, you can click on the name of that species, and it will open up the map in iMapInvasives filtered to that species. And so I clicked on frogbit, and so it opened up the map filtered to frogbit. It does help if you're logged in already, if you want to see more than just the confirmed presences. But you can still click on that map, and the public map will show you the confirmed points. But if you wanted to see like the unconfirmed and the treatments and so forth, then you would need to log in before you click on that link. All right, and so you can see there's quite a bit of frogbit across the state. One thing that's a brand new feature from earlier this year is that now we incorporate iNaturalist records, the previous 5 years of iNaturalist records for the non-native species on our list, our network list. And you can see there's quite a bit of alignment with the iMap data, but then as you get into states that aren't necessarily using iMap as their primary database, then the iNaturalist really does pop out as a good way to see that distribution of those species. And if I zoom out a little bit, and keeping in mind that iNaturalist is a crowdsourced observation database, so it says, and it's also crowdsourced in identifications. So bear that in mind as you're looking at records and so forth. I always tell people that you need to fully investigate, any iNaturalist records, especially if they're far away from any known iMap records, because sometimes there's misidentifications, there are intentional plantings, and so forth. But here you can see that the frogbit on Long Island is aligning pretty well with the iMap. So iNaturalist and iMap are aligning well. And if I click on, say, if I click on the spot where there's both a green iMap record and that pink triangle is the iNaturalist record, you get this table that pops up with the confirmed IMAP presences. So I can click on that and open up that presence record. And this was entered directly into iMap. So we have, you can see the submitter. So this was from Luke. You can view the photo and so forth and get more information about it as well. If I go back to this table, you can also go to the tab for the iNaturalist records. If you click on details for that, then you get, you get a little pop-up box that tells you, the link for the iNaturalist record itself, and then a little bit of additional information in terms of like when it was observed, what was the coordinate and uncertainty. So that's always important as well when you're dealing with iNaturalist. Sometimes the GPS accuracy is quite large, so you do want to keep that in mind. But so I did click on that link for the iNaturalist record, and so that will take you to the source of the record and show you the photo, and you can identify, clarify for yourself that yes, this is the species of interest. Right. So another thing, let's see here, that you can do with the, when you're on, here I'm going to close some of these tabs so I can find my way again. Okay, so I'm coming back to the iMap database and coming back to New York where I have all the records turned on. And let's say I want to filter this, so I can filter these records. Mitch was showing this earlier. I could do it by species. There's lots of different ways I can filter it by organization project. But we do have these other species type fields, so you can filter, say, by plants or by microorganisms, growth type, habitat type. So here, I know for this group, aquatic would be of interest. So I'm going to apply that filter. And so the data has been reduced. There's still quite a bit of aquatic data, so it does look like we do have quite a bit of information. But if I zoom in, say, to the Long Island area, you can start to see the points, and these are specifically filtered down to the aquatic information. And one thing that's very handy on iMap is that we have these different geographic map layers. Oops. Here we go, under the layers on off. You can turn on, say, your county lines or your water bodies, which I find really handy when you're working with aquatic information. So you can see that we have the sound here, the Great South Bay Sound as a polygon, essentially. And this you'll see how this comes into play here in a bit. Like if I zoom in a little bit more and give the data a little bit of time, you can see that the water body boundaries should show up. And one thing I have found is sometimes if I turn on the satellite imagery, especially in the urban areas, sometimes the water body boundary does not match up exactly to the satellite imagery. So it's always helpful to kind of toggle back and forth between those different boundary types. Or I'm sorry, geographic base maps. So one thing that I thought would be helpful for you guys to know about, if you haven't tried this already, is to run the reports when you're looking at specific water bodies. And so we do have this button across the top that says export report. And so, of course, you could export data that's in your map view, or you can toggle that to run reports. And so we have a number of different report types. We have approaching region, area treated, infested area, and the species list by geography. And for the species list, this is helpful if you're, say, interested in a water body or a county or your PRISM, and you just want a species list of what's present or what's been reported as present in your area. So I clicked on define my boundary, and I'm going to, I could either draw a polygon on the map and say identify everything under that polygon, or I can use what we call an existing geography. And so this is where the power of iMap really shines through, because it's really based on like a GIS kind of backbone. you can pick what geography type, whether it's county or state water body. So I'm going to click water body here. And it's saying to either click on the map to select a water body, or you can draw a custom shape, a polygon on the map. So I'm going to click on Massapequa Lake here, and you can see it zoomed in and highlighted that because I want to get a species list for this lake. And like I said, sometimes the boundaries are not perfect. So I do like to add a buffer whenever I'm doing a water body layer. So I'm going to add a buffer of 10 meters to this one just to make sure I capture everything on the boundary. Or sometimes somebody will collect an invasive and then come to the shoreline to report it. And so sometimes that does not get actually captured within that, that spatial boundary and on the map itself. All right, so I can run this report. I've told it I want to get a species list for everything in there. And it takes a little bit of time to spin, so I did cheat and I preloaded this one. And so we have a list of 5 different species within Massapequa Lake. And so you can see the number of confirmed records. And if you had other layers on, like treatments or unconfirmed records and so forth, it would add those as separate columns. So it gives you quite a bit of information that's there. And it's be handy to print this out and say hand it to someone if they're looking for a list of species reported. And then I guess it didn't take that long, but let's see. So another thing that might be of interest if you're interested in what's in there. So we had mentioned the iNaturalist data. So I'm going back to my layers on off. And I'm going to turn my iNaturalist data back on. And so right now, I do have a filter on for aquatic records. This gets into some nuances that we'll have explained in our help menus. But when you're using the iNaturalist data, there's only the species name filter will work on the iNaturalist data, but the other filters do not. It was becoming way too complex on the programming end. So even though I have a filter applied for just aquatic organisms for iMap data, it's actually showing me all of the iNaturalist species. But let's say I'm interested in the species in that lake. I can turn on this identify measure tool and then draw, say, a polygon around the species in this lake here. And so that will capture both the iNaturalist and the iMap records as well. So this gives me each of those individual records. And then if I look at the iNaturalist observations, you can see there's a couple additional species. And we are working with NatureServe, the programmers for iMap. They are working on incorporating the iNaturalist data into that species list by geography report. It's just not there yet, but it should be there in a couple months where there'll be an extra column for iNaturalist as well. So, hopefully helping you look for new things that the public might be reporting, not even knowing it's an invasive species. And then another report type that is of interest, especially for horizon scanning and looking at what's coming, is what we call the approaching region report. There is a little description here for for each of these report types, but essentially it's looking at the area of interest and looking for species in a buffer around your area, but not yet in your area. So it's essentially what's knocking at the door. So if I wanted to, once again, select my water body for Massapequa Lake, I'm going to do that. I'm going to add my buffer of, say, my 10 meters once again. And then now I need to tell it what kind of area around do I want it to analyze. So let's say I want it to look 5 miles around the shoreline of Massapequa Lake and tell me any species that are aquatic species that are popping up there, but not within my lake. So I run that report, and then voila, here we have our approaching region report that shows me the different species that are not yet in Massapequa but are in the vicinity. So hopefully that'll be helpful to managers out there that are keeping tabs on either their water body, or you could do this for county or municipality and so forth. All right, and then the last thing I wanted to show you are with the email alerts. So let's see, your email alerts are under that little menu option, menu tag there, as email alerts. And so everyone has a page for creating email alerts. You can get in there and you can add or edit alerts. There's lots of configurations. So this is, anytime a new record that's entered into the database that matches your criteria that you've set up, whenever that happens, then you'll get an email to your inbox that says, here's the record, and it'll show you the record name and everything, record number. So if I wanted, some type of alert, let's see, maybe I want to do like something for like George. I want to see the new records that are coming into that. You could do a daily alert, say. It'll ask you what time you want to do it, or get those, say 8 o'clock in the morning. The next option you'll get, and for different user permissions, so everyone in iMap has different user roles assigned to them. You may or may not see this option for alerting on unconfirmed records. If you have any need to receive those alerts, maybe because you're keeping tabs on the surrounding area, or if you're one of our confirmers, please let us know. We can get you your account hooked up with those permissions. Especially, from the data management point of view, I'm always interested in seeing the unconfirmed records that are coming through. But then if you're just kind of interested in seeing what's already been confirmed, then clicking on that confirmed records is quite sufficient. We also have the option you can click to alert on bulk uploaded records. So these are big data sets that we've received from other partners, and those might get input into the database like 1,000 records at a time. I mean, that should just trigger your email once, but your email alert, sorry. But that is just something else to keep in mind. And so some of the configurations you can do, you can do it by species type. So say just one aquatic species. Maybe you only want, part 575, like prohibited or regulated species. You could do that. I'm going to leave it at any species for now and set up a filter. So I'm going to do our location filter. So my geography type, I'm going to want to do a water body. And so the state I'm looking for water bodies through the list is New York. And then I would like to see Lake George. Oops, if I can spell it right. And you can see there is a little ID number after these. If you click on those water bodies on the map, you'll find that ID number, because if you were looking for something, say mud pond, there are a lot of mud ponds in the state of New York. There's also like a lot of crystal lakes. So, if you need to match up that name to the actual location, you can do that from the map. All right, and so save that. That will, then anytime a record's entered into the Lake George boundary, then the next morning I'll receive an alert saying, hey, here are some records, and I can click on the link from those. So it's a great way to kind of keep tabs on what's coming in. All right, and there's a lot of other alert types out there. So I won't go into the details of those. We do have, like Mitch said, we have that help library. But one of them is this first time in county or district. And so, or I'm sorry, let's see. So if you want something like the first time a certain species has been entered for your county, then you can use that alert. All right. I know we're kind of like right at time, so I want to go ahead and stop there. And then we can open the floor to any questions.
Thank you. Yeah, everyone, feel free to put questions in the chat. I did see one question, so I'll get to that in a second. I'll just share my last slide just to briefly go through our take-home messages for anyone as you're thinking through any questions you have and putting them into the chat. So one take-home message is the importance of reporting to iMap to keep distributions up to date and feed into some of those regional analyses Jen talked about. There's also value in tracking management efforts in iMap. There's a lot of potential for using the iMap web map services for online mapping, sharing info with the public within your own or your own GIS projects. There are prioritization tools that can help you make decisions. And there's a lot of horizon scanning opportunities. In particular, you can set up custom email alerts to keep you up to date on what's new in your area or near your area. And what I really like about the email alerts is that it takes time to like log in and go to your area, filter on the species you care about, and check for new records. To do that regularly, it takes some time. So if you just set up an email alert once, you just spend 5 minutes setting up the alert, and then it does the work for you every day for the rest of time and ends up saving tons of time. So a lot of potential there. And one question I saw in the chat, I guess first I'll just say thank you so much to everyone, and please keep in touch. We always have more webinars going on. You can always email us. We have social media. We hope you stay connected with us. And so the one question I saw was about offline base maps. So I don't think I have time to talk about it in detail, so I'll just focus on showing you where you can learn more about the offline base maps and then maybe say a couple things about them. But on our training page, you can get to that help docs table. And for this particular case, I'll just type in base maps and you can see our offline handout.
Mitch, if you're showing are you trying to show the filter?
Oh, yeah, thank you. I'll reshare. Just to show it again, so on our training page, this button brings you to our table. And then if you type in base map in the search box, then you can get to our PDF. So essentially this is if you want like some sort of map that has useful information on it, like maybe satellite imagery or topography or something, so that when you're out in the field, you're using Survey123 or field maps or something, and the map might not load, you want to load a map. This kind of goes through that. And a lot of this help doc goes through how you can use an offline base map that we have created, so how you can download that. But you can kind of you could also do your own custom base map and just kind of substitute that in these instructions and just follow the instructions. Just change the file name to whatever you've called your file and follow these instructions to do that. So it can be used in the Survey123 forms, and it can also be used in field maps or IMA, which also has another way that you can create field maps. That you can create offline base maps, sorry. Because in field maps, it's even more important to have an offline base map. So you can still use a Survey123 without it, but with field maps, you really need an offline base map to use it when you don't have connectivity, or it just won't work at all. And so with that, I'll thank everyone and stop the recording, and then I'll see if there are any more questions.